Welcome back to Chapter 8. We're here to pick up where we left off by looking at socio and emotional developmental changes. We're now going to revisit the topic of parents. Now, whoever raised you probably had a specific parenting style. What that means is the majority of the time, they shared a certain philosophy in how to raise you. I'm going to give you 4 different types as identified by Bromren, a researcher in parenting. And as you'll see, only one of them tends to come to the top in terms of a more well-formed, well-developed child. The first is an authoritarian parent, one who believes in strict control, strict obedience, sort of the my way or the highway. This is a parent who doesn't care much for child's rights and instead gives them way too many responsibilities. This is the classic because I told you so. The opposite of that is the permissive parent. Now, sometimes parents are permissive, meaning they give their child too many rights and not enough responsibilities. But as you can see, there's 2 different types here. Some parents are permissive because, frankly, they're just neglectful. They want nothing to do with this child. They're completely inattentive to this child's needs. But that's not the same as being permissive for indulgent reasons. You see, basically, maybe mom or dad care about this child's development, but they're so worried about being liked, so worried about their child feeling bad that they fail to support appropriate levels, appropriate limits, appropriate guidelines. So that leaves us with the authoritative parent, the parent who strikes a balance between authority and permission. An authoritative parent is one who parents with guidance in mind, not just emotions and not just attitudes. So, for example, authoritative parent may provide boundaries and say, you cannot cross this line. But then they'll come right around and say, but here are all the things you can do within this, all the different paths you can go, the ways you can develop there. Authoritative parents realize that every child is different. And so even if they have multiple children, they realize that while certain guidelines and boundaries are important, one process that worked on the first child may not be appropriate for the second child. They may need a different path, a different way to develop. Now, earlier we talked about attachment and forming secure attachment with the parents or caregivers, and we just recently talked about parenting styles. And that's led some to wonder about daycares. If you look at the modern statistics for the U.S., the current statistics, half of all children spend some time cared for by people outside of their parents or caregivers. Daycare is one of the most popular places to do that, whether it's a small home daycare or a larger institution. So the question is, are we affecting our child's development? Are we depriving our child of something by having them raised for many hours a day, multiple days a week by someone else? The short answer is no. Daycare, as long as it is a good daycare, a quality daycare, does not undermine attachment at all. Parents have plenty of time to build those attachments. But what makes a quality daycare? Because not all are created equal. In fact, currently there are no real national guidelines for what a daycare can be. Each state has different rules, different decisions. Often it's based on how many kids are in the area, and that will affect what the facility has to be and what rules they have to follow. So you get a lot of very different daycares. So, what have we found that we believe we call a quality daycare and has led to good, positive child development? First, small group sizes. Now, depending on the age of the child, this may fluctuate, but 10 to 15 is a sweet spot for children preschool or higher. If they're infants or toddlers, we want much less than that, usually 5 in a group. More than that, and you really are dividing that attention, which frankly you're doing even in a group of 10. The less kids you have per caregiver, the more attention that caregiver can give the child. Secondly, you need to have trained caregivers. You know, we have kind of this myth in our culture, and I understand where it comes from. The idea that because you are a mom or a dad, you know how to raise a child. And even if you have raised your child successfully, that does not mean you're a trained caregiver. There are many different children from many different backgrounds with many different needs that are not like yours. And so true daycares, good daycares, have someone who is trained in the essentials, not just safety, but education and development. Third, a good daycare does not have turnover. I don't mean kids leaving, I mean staff leaving. If your daycare employs several individuals and they're constantly hiring and firing, that worries me. I mean, one, it's an inconsistency for your child's development, and 2, it shows me that either your daycare is bad at hiring good workers or those good workers are leaving the daycare for some reason. And finally, one of the best parenting advices I can give to anyone is simply to be consistent. Children need consistency. That helps them understand the frame of reference that is this world, how it works, how it moves, how it operates. Those guidelines come from structure and stability. And so when a child has predictable, stable care, meaning the same general rules, same general guidelines, then they begin to feel confident and comfortable in this world and can seek out and explore, push those boundaries, see what they can find out. Now, I want to talk a bit about psychosocial stages of development as we wrap up this section. I want to talk about a person named Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson was a student of Freud, and Freud focused a lot on sexual development. In fact, he had a list of what he called psychosexual stages, which I'm not going to cover in this chapter. Erikson liked the idea that children progress through stages of development, important milestones that they need to meet or problems may happen. But he believed Freud focused too much on sex and sexuality, and instead thought there were greater social stages, social challenges that we all must face. The way these work is that there's two possible outcomes to a developmental task, something that a child needs to accomplish, the good outcome and the bad outcome. Think of it as a turning point between being a greater or better competent child or a weaker individual. So there are 8 of these I want you to know, but as far as this video goes, I'm only going to teach you 4 because they apply to the age range we've been talking about. Alright, so according to Erikson, let's look at the first one. He called it trust versus mistrust. And for each of these, I'll give you an age range. So he's talking about the first year of life. And he says the great social challenge in the first year of our life is to develop an attachment, to develop a sense that the world is good and that people are going to take care of us. Well, how do we do that? Well, it goes back to secure attachment, with adults meeting our needs, taking care of us, helping us, feeding us. If that happens, we begin to develop trust in other people. However, if we don't have our needs met, if we're not helped, if we're neglected or abused, then we might develop mistrust. You got to remember, these people caring for us are the first humans we will ever meet and can set the stage for how we see other people in the future. Secondly, Erikson called it autonomy versus shame and doubt. All right, autonomy means doing it on your own. And so in the first couple of years, really 1 to 3, as we begin gaining control of this body, exploring our world, Erikson argued that the big social challenge was developing independence, developing the sense that you can try and accomplish things on your own. A child who is encouraged to try new things, who is allowed to fail but supported, helps develop autonomy. But the child who is either constantly berated or has everything done for them, that's a child that could develop a shame and doubt. It's a more negative social development. You can see how that might start to affect their further growth. Third on our list from Erikson is what he called initiative versus guilt, as in taking the initiative. Trying something without someone forcing you into it. Letting curiosity, letting excitement, letting willingness ultimately be your guideline. So, in this age range, which I think of as the preschool years, the big challenge is trying to encourage us to experience new stimuli. So let's say that you're a preschooler and you're on a playground and you see another child you've never met before playing in a sandbox. Will you go up to them and talk to them, try to play with them? Do you feel comfortable doing that? If so, Erikson would say you've developed initiative, that security, that comfortableness in trying new things, often based on a secure attachment, because they know if things go wrong, mom and dad are still there to care for them. Guilt would be that worry or fear that they're not going to be able to accomplish anything they set out to do, and therefore possibly not try. And finally, the school years, 6 towards adolescence, Erikson called industry versus inferiority. Think of industry like a factory, building something. In this case, schools are building children, building our competencies, building our intelligence, building our social relationships. And so according to Erikson, the great social challenge at this period of life is learning the basic skills that we need to not only mechanically survive this world, but to socially navigate this world, to make friends, to cooperate, all those things that will help us throughout life. And of course, the bad development, poor development, would be inferiority. Maybe we feel like we can't accomplish these things. Maybe we've had bad experiences in the previous developmental stages, and so we don't know how to talk to people, how to make friends, how to build relationships. And those certainly can come back and haunt us during our development. All right, so we're going to stop there. And when we come back, I'm going to talk a bit about gender development, the difference between gender and our sex, and look at some cultural implications of that. See you then.